I think the USS Black, which is one of two ships that serves as a reward for the ongoing campaign, is probably a polarizing ship. The other choice of reward ship for the campaign is, of course, the Tier 5 Premium USN aircraft carrier, Independence. And for the life of me, I don't know why anybody would choose that particular Tier 5 aircraft carrier over this Tier 7 premium destroyer, but I assume there are people out there. For all intents and purposes, the USS Independence isn't anything much more special than something like the Ranger or anything else. At the same time, though, the USS Black, I think, has the potential to be a polarizing ship, and I think people out there are going to say that it's not a very good one. They're going to say that it's one of those campaign ships that just kinda sucks. But are they right? Well, I suppose that depends on what you're looking for when you evaluate a ship for being good or not. I don't think anybody can argue that radar on a destroyer sucks for the destroyer that has the radar. Just ask this Gearing, who's caught out in my radar, and as a consequence has lost 5k health from me, and a lot more from my teammate assistants, and, well, he's going out of the cap, so he's not going to be taking it. Instead, I'm going to be taking the cap, and I've lost about 6,000 hit points, not really from the Gearing, but from being spotted and shot at by his teammates. So the radar on this thing, it's pretty good. It's only got a 7.5 kilometer range, which is something I think is a little bit bizarre because the USS Black is the second premium destroyer in this game to get the radar consumable. The first was the Tier 6 premium pan-European destroyer, Xarkun, and that has a radar with a 9 kilometer range compared to the 7.5 kilometers of the Black. And I think the Xarkun's radar also lasts for 15 seconds, whereas the Black's lasts for 13. Nevertheless, radar, even a 7.5 km radar on a destroyer, especially on a destroyer with an American smokescreen like the USS Black, is, by any definition, I think an overpowered combination of consumables. If I'm sitting in this smokescreen and a destroyer enters this cap, then I know he's in the cap because the cap will become contested, and as a result, he is within my radar range, so I can simply deploy the radar, spot him, shoot him, and probably, with my teammates all around me, we would be able to sink him. And there's really no counter to that. The destroyer would simply have to not come into the cap with the USS Black's smokescreen. So I think the combination of radar and smoke is a potentially overpowered combination, but the ship on which this potentially OP package of consumables sits is not all that unique of a ship. The USS Black is, for all intents and purposes, a Fletcher, which is the Tier 7 Tech Tree USN destroyer. It's a Fletcher in every sense except one. In the sense of its guns, it's a Fletcher because it has 5 127mm guns that fire at the same rate as the Fletchers. The HE has the same alpha strike, same fire chance. The AP, likewise, has the same alpha strike, and I believe they both have the same range on their guns. So these are Fletcher guns on a Fletcher hull. It also has Fletcher speed, being that it is a Fletcher hull, and the speed is fairly pedestrian. I think it can only get up to a top speed of 36, 37 knots, same as the Fletcher, and it feels slower than the Fletcher because in order to have access to these 3 radar consumables, you have to forego access to the engine boost consumable. And that's obviously not a difficult choice to make. The radar is going to be more interesting, I suppose, than the engine boost and potentially more useful. And if you want to run the USS Black with the engine boost, you might as well just play the Fletcher. But then again, maybe not. Because the thing on the Black that sets it apart from the Fletcher is its torpedo performance. Unlike the Fletcher, the Black's torpedoes have a 13.4 kilometer range, which is a very long range for destroyer torpedoes. I think the Fletcher only has a 10 km range, maybe even 9. At the same time, though, these 13-kilometer torpedoes have an alpha strike in excess of 20K, whereas the Fletcher's alpha strike is somewhere around 13, 14K, if I am remembering correctly. It might even be around 15. In any case, the Black's alpha strike on the torpedoes far exceeds the Fletcher's. It's more comparable to Japanese torpedo boats, and you might be hearing that and thinking, oh boy, this destroyer is going to be extremely potent with torpedoes that hit for over 20K and go for 13 kilometers. And you might think that, but you would be absolutely wrong, because the Fletcher, while its torpedoes aren't exactly fast, I think the base speed is 55 knots. So, comparative to other torpedoes in the game, the Fletcher's torpedoes are already slow. The Black's torpedoes are even slower. In fact, I think the Black has the slowest torpedoes in this entire game. They practically crawl through the water at the same pace as the Sloth that's been on my patch for years now. They go at 46 knots, I think, for their top speed, which means they are exceptionally slow. To make up for that exceptionally slow speed, they do have a very, very low detectability by sea range. These torpedoes are spotted in the water at 0.9 kilometers, which puts them in the same detectability sort of zone as the deepwater torpedoes on the Pan-Asian destroyers. And a 0.9 kilometer detectability by sea for torpedoes is very, very good. It theoretically means that the enemy that sees them doesn't have a lot of reaction time to dodge them. And that would be true if the torpedoes were in any sense of the word fast, but they are so slow that I find that basically you don't get hits with them very much. They're best suited for plugging up gaps and denying the enemy map real estate. In other words, they're zoning torpedoes, and you're pretty much never going to be able to accurately aim them at any kind of range. You essentially just throw them out there, and much like the floating Italian sea mine torpedoes on the Italian cruisers, you just kind of hope they hit things. They have a fairly quick reload, so you can throw them out there more often than the Fletcher can, but you shouldn't rely on them. It's the guns that is primarily going to do your damage, and this destroyer is ultimately going to be best suited to countering other destroyers. It is going to be a destroyer hunter with its radar, and of course with its radar smokescreen combo. That is the ultimate value of the USS Black. And amongst Tier 7 destroyers that are good at countering other destroyers, there's Metajerk, by the way, in the Oyster Goatland. I forgot he was in this game. But in terms of other Tier 7 destroyers that counter destroyers, the USS Black is probably one of the top ones, just because it has the radar consumable, and it has Fletcher guns and Fletcher DPM, which is very good for taking out destroyers in knife fights. So does the USS Black suck? Well, if you want to go out there torpedoing battleships and seeing huge damage numbers pop up on your screen, this destroyer is not really going to do that for you consistently, so it's probably not the one for you. But if you want to have a very effective destroyer at countering the enemy destroyers, taking the caps, and playing the objectives, the USS Black is quite good. That's really all I have to say about it, though. I hope you enjoyed my take on it. If so, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.